Actually, I'm just going to share all of desktop 2. And then I'm going to launch my keynote. So this is going to really quickly, oops, let's swap that. Let's swap that again. I have a 3-screen setup here. There we go. And I can't see any of you at this exact moment in time. So, if you're laughing at me, I will never know. And that's very comforting to me. So the Colonies game here. As I start this off, a very important piece I want you to know, and it's the reason why I chose this particular graphic for this slide, even though it is now very pixelated as it is blown up here. But this is a framework. This game is not every single piece that you need to teach the game or to teach to do the game, but it is most of it. And it's a framework on purpose. We wanted rules that were broad on purpose. And again, that's why Whose Line Is It Anyway is up here, because if you've ever watched the show, they always start off with something along the lines of the rules are made up and they don't matter anyway because, and yeah. So the rules to this game are broad, and that's intentional because we have some people that will do every single part of this and their kids will get really into it. And what ends up being called out in the units as like 2 days for a lot of kids ends up being, a week per unit in some cases, because their kids get really, really, really into the game. And so for those teachers, we wanted a framework that allowed them to fill in as many of the holes that we left as possible and totally make their own. But we also, and I will talk a little bit about this a couple of slides from now, we also wanted to make sure that teachers who are running a little bit behind, as a couple of you said that you are, don't have to do the whole thing and can just do bits and pieces. And we will talk about what some of those bits and pieces are in just a minute. The biggest caution that I have for teachers that try to do the Colonies game, and it's really easy for me to say this on the other end of a Zoom, but don't overthink it. If you're reading the instructions, and the instructions change a little bit each unit because we have different scenarios each unit, but if you're reading the instructions and you go, this seems really complicated, why don't they just do this? Do that thing that you're like, oh gosh, it would be much easier if it does this, or if it said this, or if we ran it this way. Because there is no answer key provided, and there is no answer key provided because every student group is going to come up with different things, and it's just going to be sort of up to you to sort of judge based off of the history that we're all learning how this is going to go. Now, some of you have poked at the Colonies game before, and some of you have not. Whichever camp you fall into, don't worry, I'm going to explain all of this, and you will leave tonight going, what the heck did he just say? No, I'm kidding. You will leave tonight, hopefully, with a little firmer understanding of what you can do with it, and you will ultimately do with it what you will. This year, we did go back and add an introduction to this back in Unit 2. So if you have finished Unit 2, you'll notice towards the end of it, we have this optional activity where kids can develop their colonist. And there's a handout for that. I should have put a copy of it on the screen here, but encourage kids to think about, hey, as you create your character for the year, and our characters are immortal, they're going to live, a very long time. But their character, what is the character's goal for leaving the country that they are leaving and coming over to the United States? Have them think about that when they're developing their character. Have them think about what skills they bring to the table. So I'm in Northern Michigan, and in just a few weeks, the entire northern half of the state is going to shut down for deer hunting season. I don't personally hunt, so that's not a skill that I have, but hey, you probably have some hunters in your classroom. That's a skill. Not only is that a skill, that's a skill that's going to be really, really, really helpful in areas of the country where they're not going to be able to rely on agriculture. I do have a green thumb, so I'm hopefully not going to land in New England, but I have a garden every summer, and we grow zucchini and tomatoes. And by the time August hits, I am sick of zucchini and tomatoes. But I can grow things. I know how to keep plants alive. I know how to make plants grow. So that's a skill, and that's a skill that would make me useful in the Colonies. So encourage kids to think about some of the things that they're good at that might be skills that would be useful for survival. Playing video games on the Nintendo Switch is also a skill that I have, but that's not really going to help me in a place with no electricity. And obviously no Nintendos have been invented yet. That didn't happen to the 1800s as a card game. Bonus trivia fact for you. I am that nerdy. So, think about what skills they have that might be useful for survival, and then think about what limitations they might have landing in different places. The students that you are going to put together in these groups are going to be together all year. So eventually in each unit, whether you're doing the hardcore version or just the Faxman version, you're going to say, hey kids, let's break into our groups for colonies. And the same kids are going to be working together for the rest of the school year. So plan accordingly. I put this on there because my best friend in elementary and middle school, was a great human being, and we loved to talk. And teachers knew that and knew that we should never ever be put together in a group. So thinking about, we're at a point in the year where your little cherubs a little bit better than you did the first couple of weeks. So keeping in mind as you start to develop groups, whether you allow them to choose with some, feedback from you, or whether you choose to make the groups yourself. Just remember, every unit, at least twice, you're going to say, hey, break into your groups for colonies, and the same kids are going to get together. So plan accordingly. This is our base map. And this was another reason I went in to visit Mary Sue the other day, because I had an extra copy and I gave it to her. I also gave a copy over to Mrs. Mulder, since she, has been picking at this game in particular for a couple of years. But this is revised from previous years, and we revised it for some good reasons that I'll let Phil talk about after I go through this presentation. But we wanted to kind of funnel kids into specific areas of the country where they would land. And in some cases, the grid was a little too big. And in other cases, the grid included too much water. So you're kind of locked into place if you land at, if you were to land at H11, even on this map, the way it's presented here. So we revised the gridding on this map, and it now also matches the clickable map of the Eastern United States a little bit more easily. You can see, Karen, you were talking map skills. You can see down here, every grid is an 80 by 80 mile square. And if you would like to get a markable wall map version of this, I do have a couple that I might be able to send out, I will double check my stockpile, Patty. I see you in there, but we also might be able to, I don't know, because I don't have a budget at my ISD, but we might be able to figure out how to get some printed and sent out to you. They're not super expensive when you buy in bulk, and Phil has more experience on this front than I do, so I'll let him talk about ways we can possibly order some of these in just a little bit when I get through this. The big materials that you need to assemble, and this is in the Colonies document in the lesson plan proper, but up to 6 plastic durable folders. We're looking for the durable ones because they're going to go through heck over the course of the year. They're a lot of times going to live with you on your desk until you get to the Colonies piece, but I also taught in the classroom where my own desk things, the longer they stayed on it, sometimes did not last. So we're telling you, think about getting some of the more durable folders. School specialty is great for a lot of things, but not necessarily for things to last all year. And then the base map. So that base map that I displayed on the previous page is available. It's available, y'all. It's available in it's available in digital form, in a PDF form that you could print off just on a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. And you can actually also drop it into Google Slides. And this is actually a tip that I have given teachers before, because you're going to be marking on it throughout the year. So if I go back to this, one of the places that kids might land to set up their colony might be, let's say, square D9, or actually, let's say like square D12 right here, because that's closer. So they're in the square, and what you might do is you might drop this into Google Slides and then just draw a box around it and say Timmy's group. Another group might land at, let's say, J9. Okay, so this one's going to be Parker's group. So you can put it in Google Slides and then just add shapes to it that sort of have that disclaimer of whose it is in there if you don't have room in your room for a wall map. If you do have one of the wall maps, you can just take a dry erase or a vis-a-vis marker and you can just write it in here, and when you're all done, it'll come off. So the base map is important, and if you aren't able to, if I don't have a stockpile, we might be I can show you a little bit more about how to make it work in Google Slides. I also recommend that you take a binder and print out all the Colonies materials as you go and make some notes along the way. Now I say as you go because Phil and I are going to be revising these as the plane is in the air as we collect feedback from you. So print it out. The Unit 3 stuff is definitely ready to go. So print it all out and put it in the binder. And we'll make some changes based off of your feedback this year, but you may also just decide, you know what, this is how I'm going to run it, and you can take those notes in the margin. So we recommend that you print out the Colonies materials for your own reference as you go. And we will have scenario cards that are new in each unit, along with some growth and prosperity cards that'll start up in the next unit. I'm not going to get into that part now because that'll come when we get into Unit 4 in December. We are still revising the scenario questions, but basically we are still going to be focusing on how do you survive and what is the survival. So we're finalizing the compelling question, but we know what the supporting questions are going to be. So in Unit 3, every unit a scenario is going to center around what the colonists are facing. So Unit 3, this is when we're starting to set up some colonies. What are the environmental conditions in the place that you land? How might those conditions influence your decisions about living here or moving somewhere else? And what are ways that you could make a living that are feasible in your place? Wide-scale agriculture is not happening in New England. The growing season is too short. It's a rockier soil. That's not going to happen. Whereas you can actually grow stuff the further south you go. So these are the sorts of things that kids are going to have to grapple with in Unit 3. Unit 4, we're going to get into what are the conditions around you. So, if you don't like where you're at, are you going to expand your colony in a different direction, and where are you going to go? And if your population is expanding, it gets a lot easier to say, hey, we've got to move. We can't all live in this 80 by 80 chunk anymore. So Unit 4 is about growth and, what are the conditions like nearby. Unit 5, we're going to have the colonists start to, get some heat from the old world, so to speak. And we're going to talk about what new regulations have been passed by British Parliament or the King. Which of those new regulations might have an impact on how you live. So Unit 5 is our unit that's kind of the road to the Revolutionary War. Unit 6, our questions that we're going to consider are what are the main exports or imports from your colony? That's going to be important as we talk about the war itself. What features of your economy might persuade people to be either patriots or loyalists? And in this particular case, are the people who live there, are you going to support the revolution or are you going to support your home country? And then finally, in the final unit, we're going to talk about, hey, what forms of government are possible for your colony? What are the main features or different forms of government that may spring up there? So these are the scenarios. They're a work in progress, and we will get to those as we go. Every unit, students are going to be presented with a scenario, and that's the scenario that they're going to face. And what I have here are a version, and it's already changed because we have this version and another new version all in the same document right now, and I'll share that in just a minute. But these are the places where kids could conceivably land. So in what you're going to do in Unit 3, every group is going to grab a card, and the card is going to have one of these locations on it. And these are the locations where they are going to land and set up their colony. So there's a new version of this as well as this version, as well as the original version. And you have the choice of which one you want to use, because we don't know which one is the most effective because 2 of them are new. So I will show you this I will show you the other version in just a second. So each unit, students are presented with a scenario, and in each unit, students are going to have to do a little bit of paperwork. This is where things got confusing, so I'm just going to go over it briefly here, and then when we get to Unit 4, I will just talk about the paperwork part. But the best analogy, the analogy that seemed to fit the best for teachers trying to do this game was, think of it like a check register. You are not going to throw away the original page when you have updated it. You are going to keep adding to it. So you will always have the most recent stuff on top in each group's folder, and you can trace all the way back to the very first one. The reason why on this, and this is what it looks like, the reasons why on this is because if something goes horribly wrong, like you are going through the kids' folders one day and it's 1773 and your colony has this kid's colony has a population of 10 million. Something went wrong with the math somewhere. So this will allow you to go back and actually track and see, okay, where did the math go wrong? To go back to their Unit 2 supply roster, then their Unit 3 supply roster, then their Unit 4 supply roster. So they're always going to take their old number and add it to this and then multiply it by whatever number is rolled on the dice that pop up. More on this in Unit 4. Just know that the page that looks like this in the materials, you are going to print a huge stack of them because we're going to go through them all year. Every group is going to include 3 special roles. Someone in the group gets to be the colonial governor. And the colonial governor, you can either say, hey, Mrs. Mulder, I want you to be the colonial governor for your group. Or you can say, hey, Mary Sue, I want you to be the colonial archivist for the group. And these people have important roles because the governor is the only person who can come to you and ask you questions. The colonial archivist is the only person who will have access to that supply roster. So I'm looking at a couple of you. I can't remember who told me that they're teaching math and intercession right now, but find a person who's good at math for the colonial archivist role. And then the colonial explorer. There will be some opportunities for kids' colonies to interact with one another depending on proximity. And your colonial explorer is going to be the only person who is allowed to communicate with, trade with, or contact neighboring colonies. Everyone else in the group is going to be part of the colonial assembly. You'll all work together. So if it's a group of 6 and the group has a question, they will let the governor know what that question is, and the governor is responsible for going to you, the teacher, to ask those questions. If they want to know more about, hey, how much food do we have, or how many people are in our colony? The colonial assembly will ask the archivist, and if you really desperately need some food and you don't have any, you are going to send your colonial explorer out to other groups to try to trade with them. So think about who you put in those 3 roles, and everyone else is part of the assembly. You can rotate these roles each unit if you want to, but make sure that you put responsible people in, particularly the archivist role, because they're going to have to do some heavy math on the fly, and you don't want to find out that all of your grain stores were exhausted and your entire colony dies. We never make an option is never going to be that the colony just dies and vanishes and goes away. That's not going to be any of the options that kids have as part of this. We'll always at the very least say, hey, you're hanging on by the skin of your teeth there, but that's just because they're 5th graders. We will pull the rug out from under them in 8th grade. Where do we land? I'll show you the new landing cards in just a minute, but this is what they look like originally. And then you can see from a couple of slides back, this is one option for what they look like now. And then we have an even prettier option that Phil came up with that is also in the packet that I'll share with you in just a minute. For the landing, which happens in the unit that we are currently in, students are going to select a card at random. That's where their people land. And at the end of each unit, if you, the teacher, believe the settlers have tackled their scenario in a productive way, you will then allow them to choose an expansion card, and that will let them expand their colony in any land-based direction for however many squares they are given. And again, this is where if your people don't save up enough food to get through the winter in New England, we're not going to say, hey, your colony is dead. We're just not going to let them grow. So basically all of this is up to you. That's why I say there's no answer key for this. It's just going to be if your kids go all in on farming and they're in New England, they're in Maine, Try to caution them against that because, you're not going to be able to do wide scale, huge farming up in New England because of the growing season. But if they go all in on it, then the penalty isn't going to be their entire colony died. The penalty will be they don't get to expand because part of determining who the winner of this at the end is, how big and successful the colonies are. So after you've done the landing, once you've completed some of the parts of the Giants units that relate back to geography, you're going to give students the scenario. And the scenario will be the questions that we asked before. You're going to let them get into groups and sort of problem solve and try to figure out how are we going to tackle this problem. And then at the end of each unit, students will have learned what the colonists actually did in their zone. And they're going to compare their solutions to what the colonists did. If you skip everything else, at least have kids get into small groups, give them the scenarios at the start of a unit, give them the scenarios that the colonists are going to try to grapple with, have them try to grapple with it, and then circle back to that at the end. So if you want to skip everything else about the game because you're like, this is too confusing, he's been talking about this for 15 minutes and I have no idea what's going on, at least give your kids the problems that the colonists are working on and treat it like a pre and post test. How does this group of kids solve the problem of where they landed? How does this group of kids solve the problem about how are they going to survive the winter, etc. So if you do nothing else, at least do that part. So the final notes that I want to give before I kind of close this down and we move on to the next piece. It is a framework, and we made it a framework versus a series of if-then statements because we want you to customize it to meet your needs. Don't overthink it. That seems to be the biggest piece that comes up, and it's again really easy for me to say don't overthink it, but don't overthink it. The most important part of the game, like I said on the previous slide, are those scenarios. So if you do nothing else, let them grapple with the scenarios. If that supply roster gets too cumbersome, skip it. And again, finally, all year, take notes about what works and what doesn't. We want your feedback. We want to make this a lot better. Phil says this reminds him of the early days designing the Oregon Trail game. I don't disagree with him on that front, but I also know that I am probably never going to get this project to Oregon Trail levels of popularity and people knowing. Gosh, I get dumber as the day goes on. I know what I'm trying to say and I can't summon the words, so I'm just going to stop talking at this point. So